Welcome everyone to our video on the Wiser Societies chapter of the book, The Coodling of the American Mind. To begin with, this book has been a great journey through the current realities of our society and our failures in educational, family, and social spheres. So far, the book has given us a lot of insights into the way the world is run, but in this final chapter, there are some important ideas about what the failure holds for our society in terms of social networking, freedom and free play, identity politics, and universities committed to truth. Throughout this book, we have talked about wisdom and the opposite. We have talked about how parents and society overprotect their children, and instead of doing them good, they do them harm. To start talking about this chapter, we must be clear about the three psychological principles, wisdom, and the three great untruths. We can see that in the next chart. We have the first part. Young people are anti-fragile. Prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. And what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. We have the second part. We are all prone to emotional reasoning and confirmation bias. Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded, but once mastered, no one can help you as much, not even your father or your mother. And the great untruth, always trust your feelings. And the last one, we are all prone to dichotomous thinking and trivialism. The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and life is a battle between good people and bad people. In order to summarize the book, we can talk about how it is divided in four parts. In part one of this book, we discussed the three psychological principles and showed how some recent practices and policies of many campuses encourage students to embrace unwisdom rather than wisdom. In part two, the book talked about what happens when students embrace the three great untruths within an institution that has principally low levels of viewpoint diversity, weak leadership, and high sense of threat. In the part 3 of this book, we saw that there is no simple explanation for what is happening thanks to certain trends. For example, increasing political polarization, rising rates of adolescent depression and anxiety, a shift toward more fearful, protective, and intensive parenting, widespread of play deprivation and risk-taking by IGEN members, and also bureaucratic and overprotective universities. And as a final touch, we have a growing passion for justice combined with a greater commitment to achieving equal outcomes in all areas. And we also have to take into account that in part 4, the author offered some suggestions based on the three psychological principles for improving parenting. Also, this book talks about alarming trends that have no tendency to change easily. The authors tell us that according to Steven Pinker, a cognitive psychologist, things in the future tend to improve globally. They also talk about the British historian Thomas Babington, who mentions that we cannot absolutely prove that those are in error who tell us that society has reached a turning point, that we have seen our best days. But so said all who came before us, and with just as much apparent reason. On what principle is it that, when we see nothing but improvement behind us, we are to expect nothing but deterioration before us? It is very important to take into account that the authors do not want to create false expectations or fall into catastrophizing. Their optimism is based on the fact that the more serious a problem is, the more incentive there is to solve it. When this happens, usually individuals, companies, and governments, sensing the gravity of the situation, seek for innovative solutions, whether driven by personal commitment, market forces, or political pressures.
Seeking for answers, we ask ourselves, how might things change with such complicated panorama? The authors try to draw some green shoots that even nowadays still being used, mostly because some of those problems have incidence in today's crisis. They state four ways to solve the issues. First one is social media, second one is free play and freedom, Third one is better identity and politics. And the fourth one is how the universities are committing to the truth as a process. The first one refers to the usage of social media. Social media like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and the other ones that could arrive to your mind are implicated in the increase of mental illness and rising political polarization all over the world, of course, in which they are accepted. Facing those problems, major companies tweaked algorithms, they asked for identity verification, and they took some steps to reduce harassment. They also have some standard age for starting an account. All those measures were taken after some scandals, public outrages, and calls for government regulations. In our context, the Internet has permanently changed our reality. The World Wide Web provides us access to an infinite amount of information. Since the 1990s, it has redefined the very concept of borders by allowing users to create new ways of interacting. For many, social networks have turned into a vital part of social life. According to a Statista Research Department on October 18, 2022, they published research that shows that in Colombia, up to 69% of the population were monthly active social media users as of January 2020. The starting of the pandemic situation, if we remember. The largest share of internet users in Colombia are aged between 25 and 34. Despite the diversity of platforms that have seen the light in recent years, Facebook has managed to grow as well as to adapt over time, placing itself as the most popular mobile social network among Colombians and the third most visited via desktop. In order to stop problems we presented before, the pressure applied by governments will move parents, schools, and students gradually to adopt better practices of intake, just as we did with junk food and cigarettes. We need to have self-regulation. Some of the green shoots presented were both Facebook and Twitter hired social psychologists in order to understand how their platforms could change to increase the collective health, fighting against oppression inducing, openness, avoiding polarizing, and civility of public conversation to lessen harassment supporting all those effects of social media. With the campaign called The Truth About Tech, two companies, Common Sense Media and the Center of Human Technology, are trying to work with the tech industry to lessen the negative effects of device using children. The idea is to make students and parents aware about the health effects they may have. As a second solution, authors state free play and freedom for fight against overprotection, which is harming our children more than the protection intentions themselves, as we could see in the previous explanations. The adolescent mental health crisis has finally caught the attention of society, and the idea is to allow kids play outside, with and without adult supervision. As the United States is overcoming step by step the violent wave they had in 1970s and 1980s, we have to remember that they have a very violent period in which violence increased a lot. As a green shoot, Utah became the first state to pass into law which allows children have the rights to supervise time and avoid parents to be arrested when they gave it to them. The main idea is to give kids more autonomy and responsibility, supported by some policies and practices from parents and schools. As a third pillar, it is necessary to rethink about identity politics. Since 2016, in the United States, there was a rise of the alt-right, which means alternative right, and white nationalism movements, leading scholars to write more about the way emphasizing racial identity leads to a bad response in a multiracial society. It is not a secret the ways used for the identitarian extremists of both sides to join their groups against their common enemies. This is not only a problem for racial identities, but we can see more because we can see some religious movements like extreme Islamists being part of radical groups. The problems here are not only the beliefs those groups pursue, but the depicting they do about others. Those ideas become representative and mainstream, pulling out a clash of civilization to prove their beliefs that always tend to blame the opposites. Some writers like Timur Kuran and Turkish-American political scientist Amy Chua, a Chinese-American law professor, and Jonathan Rauch, a gay author and activist, want to show others the way the left thinking fits the right one and vice versa. So they are looking for a perspective changing. See people under a humanity perspective instead of classifying them. It is important to remember that humanity tends to be tribal. However, fostering teamwork will help societies to join as individuals for a common task for equity. Dalai Lama advises to focus on the similarities better than in the differences. As a last tool, authors make an analysis of the process of the universities. As we could see in previous explanations, universities are tended to follow the safetyism culture, in which students should be comfortable in all senses, leaving aside the scientific thinking, and their main purpose, of course, which is seeking the truth by research. The University of Chicago has adopted a new statement, where fun is not its goal. They actually have a motto, where fun goes to die, pointing reference to their need to follow knowledge. If universities around the world adopt this statement, they will help to push back the creep of safetyism. Some presidents of universities don't agree with safetyism culture because they know it is bad for students' autonomy. On the other hand, most of students believe educational institutions should have a little bit of call-out culture. Students are not fragile and they are not afraid of ideas. They would like to think. If this academic culture reaches some universities groups, they will help to overthrow mental stereotypes and then market forces will take care of the rest. As a result, it will surge more application and enrollments to those universities. The alumni donations will increase, more schools will prepare teens to get into those universities, and more parents will prepare their children to be admitted, which is super positive. This will mean less test preparation, less overprotection, more free play, and more independence. Once we get those principles, they will help to reverse the epidemic of depression, anxiety, self injury, and suicide, which are common problems between our children. As a conclusion, it is necessary to train up youth in wisdom and virtue. If they are not trained, they will manage institutions under the management of ignorance, causing chaos and destruction instead of providing safety to people. To finish, I would like to mention a statement of the end of the chapter. If we can educate the next generation more wisely, they will be stronger, richer, more virtuous, and even safer. Thank you.